Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. I'm going to go ahead and get started with some webinar housekeeping and introductions while the rest of our participants join. So here are the few of the items I'll go over in terms of housekeeping and information about the rebates that's available to those of our customers that qualify. So for this webinar, mics and cameras will be off for the duration of the presentation. If any of you are having issues with your audio or hearing, those adjustments can usually be rectified under this tab under the speakers, and you might just need to select a different set of speakers. The meeting chat will be disabled. However, you will be able to type in short questions into the Q&A section, and you can either post those anonymously or the name that you use on the registration form will pop up. We have a very small staff. There's just one other person with us today. And so we'll do our best to try to answer those questions. However, you may notice that if you have any longer or detailed questions, which we encourage you to ask, we will probably ask you to kindly send those to our Ask an Expert email address, and we will post that on the screen several times. So just a heads up, we can't answer very many detailed questions in this particular format, but we do have another format to get those answered. And so please do send those our way if you have those. With regards to our customers that do qualify for the $20 rebate, those will appear under the total adjustments section of your bill, and it can take a while. We complete our processing and then it goes to the customer service division. And in other words, it can take up to 90 days. So we have all the information that we need from the registration form for those of you that qualify to receive the rebate. And if you do have questions, feel free to reach out, but just know it can take a while. So in 2023, the Water Authority updated its drought management plan, which factors in the current drought stage as determined by the U.S. Drought Monitor, as well as our community's water usage, which is measured in gallons per capita per day, or GPCD. And you can see on this matrix that we factor in the current GPCD, the Drought Severity Coverage Index, as well as our pumping and production goals. Currently, we are considered a drought advisory, which means that there are several measures that are triggered. We are expanding our public outreach in terms of the expenditures on advertising and customizing some of our outreach and marketing materials with the drought information. And as you all are benefiting from today, we are offering these so-called drought classes to our customers, and or to folks, anyone that's interested in our customers can receive a $20 rebate. Now, the conservation program is taking advantage of this increased momentum, urgency, and other partner messaging that's associated with the current drought in order to help increase awareness and understandings of our operations and where our water comes from. As I think it's important and helps give folks a better understanding as to the importance of conserving water anytime, but especially during this current drought. So many of you probably are aware that the Water Authority's processes, we have a dual system. When water is available and in the river, and sadly the river is dry, for those of you that haven't been over the bridge just yet, so in times like this, we are forced to rely on our aquifer, or our savings account, as we like to call it. And this becomes particularly important for folks to conserve water because we are drawing from our aquifer. And that savings account is what we hold on to in times of drought, but it is water for future generations that is incredibly important to save. Also, this also gives us an opportunity to talk about that we are planning for the future, and we are one of the only utilities in the whole nation that has a 100-year sustainable water supply. We have a document called Water 2120. We're in the process of going through a 10-year update on that. And that document is all about planning for a drier and less certain future and the ability to have a sustainable water supply after 100 years. So what this conservation is a big part of this, as well as some other interesting factors such as water reuse and aquifer storage and recovery. It becomes really important for everyone to do their part to help conserve water and help out with the rest of the community and help us with some of our ordinances related to water waste and time of day restrictions. So if you see folks using their sprinklers between 11 and 7, or you see broken sprinklers or water just running down the street, we rely on you folks to help report that water. No one wants to have a high water bill or purposely waste water. Many folks just aren't aware that they have an issue with their irrigation system, for instance. And if you call that in or use our online water waste reporting tool, we will send them a letter and contact them to get that taken care of. We offer a lot of resources to help folks use water efficiently and understand how to take care of their yards. And just a few of those are our popular xeriscaping guide. This can be downloaded as a PDF from our website. Most of the guide is about plants, and we have a master plant list on over 600 plants. If you haven't already been to it, the 505outside.com website is the Water Authority's dedicated yard and garden website, and it's a great place to go to get started with information about our rebates and the efficient best practices that we'll be discussing today and in this series of webinars. We also have a great monthly newsletter that has articles from local experts such as Joran and a plant of the month, and we don't share your information with anyone. So please scroll to the bottom of the 505 Outside website and sign up for that newsletter. Also, don't forget that we really want to help you, and you can easily reach out to us at our Ask an Expert email address that you'll see under the third bullet point there. We also have a great irrigation guide, and you can download that from the website as well. It's just right on the homepage. So today, we're really excited to welcome Joran Viers. He is an ISA board certified master arborist, and I believe is widely recognized as one of the leading tree experts in our city and state. And what I think really truly sets Joran apart is not just his depth and breadth of knowledge, which is expansive, but it's his ability to communicate it clearly. Also, his passion for teaching about trees is both incredibly engaging and contagious. I like to say that in landscape management, especially horticulture, everything builds upon a strong foundation, and understanding the fundamentals like tree biology is an essential aspect to managing healthy and long-lived trees, particularly in the highly variable growing conditions that we see in our own yards. So for example, when you understand how water moves through a tree, irrigation practices become much more intuitive. Similarly, understanding how a tree responds to wounds helps guide when, where, and how to make proper pruning cuts. So we're incredibly grateful that Joran continues to support the Water Conservation Program's education efforts. He's contributed several newsletter articles, presented at previous webinars, and teaches classes for us at Professional Landscape Contractors. And I encourage you to search his name on our website to explore some of his work that we've hired him to do. Also, he'll be presenting 2 additional tree-focused webinars in September and October. So with that, Joran, thank you for being here today, and I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, well, thank you, Amos. You can hear me all right?
Yep, it sounds good. If you want
Wonderful.
to share
That's a
your
lot to
screen.
live up to. I hope I can. I'm glad I can't see the audience. I don't typically get stage fright, but that's a lot of people. So we're going to jump right into it. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and go from there. So today we
Looks
are
good.
going to
Thank you.
talk about tree biology, which is basically how trees are put together and how they work. I do work for Legacy Tree Company. We're an all aspects tree service. We do planting, pruning, pest treatment, site improvement, all kinds of things to help your trees grow better. Okay. So this is me in a nutshell. I'm not going to go into it in great detail, but I do have some credentials and some experience. This is me in my natural habitat, which also I think speaks to a grounded experience. I prefer to be found barefoot in the garden. All right. We're basically going to be talking about anatomy and physiology, back to science class, but I'm going to try to keep it very relevant to things that matter in how you manage a tree. We're going to talk about the different parts of the tree, what they do, how they're arranged, and where they're found. So plants are living organisms like animals, but they're very, very different from animals. Uh, One major difference is that they feed themselves. They eat the air. They do this using the power of sunlight. And so they're what we call a primary producer. They use all of that energy that they create in the form of simple sugars to power their own functions and to build more complicated systems within the plant body. Plants don't have muscles or nerves, and generally speaking, the plants we're talking about don't move around from where they germinate. Animals obviously differ in all these ways, but there's also a lot of similarities. Um, Plants have male and female sexes, just like animals do. Plants use oxygen for respiration at the cellular level. And I think this is really important to think about. We talk about how plants give off oxygen, and they do. But every living cell in that plant also uses oxygen. And this is especially critical in the root zone. If the roots can't breathe, they're not going to work well. Plants grow, maintain, protect, and reproduce. They interact with their immediate environment. They communicate. And I am more and more convinced they do have social lives that we're just beginning to kind of understand. Within the world of plants, trees are a specific subset, right? They develop wood, which is a perennial material that lasts decades, centuries, millennia sometimes. They put on secondary growth. That is to say, they just keep getting bigger as they're growing, which gives them a huge size potential. The tallest organism in the planet is a tree. The heaviest organism in the planet is a tree. The longest lived organism that we know of are trees. So they really are amazing things. And they do provide us a lot of things useful in many ways and also just socially beneficial, calming effects, shading, all of those things. These are some terms that we're going to use. You'll see them again later. Don't sweat the small stuff, but it's good to know terminology. Xylem is young wood that acts as straws and moves water collected from the roots up to the leaves. We also call it sapwood. Cambium is a thin layer, much like stem cell tissue, in that it exists to create new tissue. And that's its whole function. It makes new sapwood on one side, and on the other side, it makes new phloem. Phloem is the inner bark. It's protected by the dead outer bark, but the inner bark is alive and a critical part of the tree. That is the vascular tissue that moves sugars from where they are created in the leaves to wherever the plant might need to use them. Adjacent leaves, stem growth, fruit growth, root growth. So the phloem is moving sugars all over the place. Heartwood is old wood that has lost its living tissue and lost its function as vascular tissue, but it remains as support tissue. And then bark, that outer protective layer. Important parts of the tree. Critical parts of the tree. I used to think there were two, now I think there are three. At the top of the list are the fine roots. These are very young, very small roots that, because they don't have bark, can absorb water and do. And they absorb water because there's more in the soil than in the root. And then that water is pulled all the way up the tree and passes out through the leaves because there's more water in the leaf than there is in the atmosphere. So it creates this flow of water. If these young roots live long enough, they will develop bark, they'll stop absorbing water, and they will begin to function as transmission roots as opposed to absorbing roots. And these fine, small, young roots typically are found more abundantly further away from the trunk than close. Right in close, we've got really big roots moving a lot of water, but there's not a whole lot of uptake. Uptake is typically found further out, maybe even beyond the edge of the canopy. Another critical part of the tree is what I term the living rind. And that's these three areas we just mentioned, phloem, cambium, and xylem. Those are all extremely critical tissues to the tree. And anything that negatively impacts that part of the tree is going to damage the tree. The diseases and pests we really worry about are the ones that attack vascular tissues. And that's what the living rind is. It's the vascular tissues. Another critical part of the tree, though, is the dead outer bark. It's dead, much like our hair and fingernails are dead. They still have function, even though they're dead. But it protects all of that living rind on the inside, and it protects even the heartwood below that. So anything that penetrates the outer bark has the potential to create real problems for the tree. In the picture here, we see a little honey locust, I believe, that probably has a cankering disease that is killing some of that living rind, and then it has been attacked by a secondary pest, a boring beetle that is tunneling in that dying tissue. And that whole part of the vascular system is now out of play, non-functional, and exposed to decay. So, how does tree growth start? Well, outside of human intervention, it typically starts with the germination of a seed. And the first thing that happens when a seed germinates is the root comes out and it attaches into the soil and it starts doing root things. And if that doesn't happen, the rest of it doesn't happen either. So roots are primary in time. They go first. They lead the way. They also are primary in function in the way that if the tree cannot be absorbing enough water to move it up and out through the leaves, then photosynthesis will have to shut down or completely stop. And the tree is still living, so it's still burning sugar energy, but it's not making any new. And it can actually start to go into a deficit and maybe also into a heat stress. So roots absorb that water, they absorb the minerals that are in the water, they anchor the tree, which is quite critical, and they communicate. There's some amazing recent research that shows the degree to which roots serve as communication and even sharing mechanisms between trees, related and even of different species. And a lot of that happens through mycorrhizal fungi. Mycorrhizal fungi are an amazing thing. They are a group of fungi that live in the soil that grow into roots, but they're much finer than the roots. And then they also grow out into the soil. And basically what happens is the fungi more efficiently gets water and nutrients out of the soil, which it can't do a whole lot with. It needs carbon, but it can take that into the root and barter. I'll trade you water and nutrients for sugars that you've made through photosynthesis. Tree says, great, I needed help getting water and nutrients. Here's some sugar. And it sets up this really nice symbiosis. Those fungal strands in the soil connect between trees and allow for both information communication as well as even transfer of carbon. Quite amazing. Root architecture is really important. A lot of people have a kind of a misunderstanding of the shape of the root system in the soil. So one thing to really understand is that roots, by and large, are shallow phenomenon. You do have occasional deep roots and things that seem to break that rule, but roots want four things. They want water, they want nutrients, They want oxygen, and they want a soil that's not so hard that they can't push their way through it. Those four things are much more abundant in shallow soil. So roots tend to grow where the resources thereafter are found. They grow shallow. Um, they also hold up the tree this way. It's like roots have been described kind of as ropes or cables underground that are tied off at the base of a more solid stacked structure. And all of these roots out in the soil have a friction that combined is very, very strong and keeps that tree centered and upright. Taproots. We hear a lot about taproots. It is my belief that they are largely mythological, and especially in urban settings. In urban settings, we are not planting a tree from a seed and walking away and letting it grow for 50 years. We are buying something that was started in a nursery, moved to another nursery, up potted, moved around. Every time that root ball was up potted, any downward tendency has been short circuited. So taproots don't really happen in the urban setting. A seed grown elm might well put down some pretty deep roots, but especially around here, what is a taproot going to be tapping into? We don't have deep soil moisture in most of the city area, maybe along the river. Roots are going to go where what they're after is found, and that's found shallow. So roots are shallow. This is a tree that came out of a site on the UNM campus a number of years ago. A building was going to get built. This tree was in the way. Rather than cut it down, they said, we're going to move it. And so they used a neat tool called an air spade that uses compressed air. They blew the soil off the root system and pulled it out of the ground and moved it. What I really like about the picture is it shows how quickly the transition happens from vertical trunk to horizontal root. That is the rule, not the exception. So again, a couple of other ways to look at that. The black and white drawing on the left there speaks to how far beyond the edge of the drip line those roots may go. 2 to 3, I've even heard 5 times. It's not a uniform plate, however. They may go 10 feet on one side and 60 feet on the other if that other side is where the resources were found. They're also quite shallow. You can see in this drawing, it's a thin mass of roots with not a whole lot of depth. In the photo on the right, this is taken from Heathrow Airport in London, a tree project. They had a stand of trees that weren't doing well. They finally determined it was a soil compaction issue. So there they are using that air spade tool I mentioned to blow the soil off the roots. And then they came back in with a compost amended soil that was not compacted and added it in. But what I really like about the photo is it shows us the degree to which roots cross each other and share space. And if you think about the communication function that is happening through those roots, this makes sense. That communication can happen because roots get to go everywhere. Above ground, the canopies kind of have their own space. They don't mix a whole lot, but below ground, it's a free for all and a good thing for the trees that it is. So this then kind of brings up the question of how much soil volume are we going to need to provide for a tree in order for it to have enough root mass to take in enough water to support the crown above. This is based on some work that was done back in 2007, 2008. And basically what they're doing is they're showing mature trees of different sizes. So something small like maybe a crabapple, something more mid-sized, maybe a Chinese pistache. Maybe we've got a cottonwood on the right there. The soil volume is fairly significant. The shape of the soil volume is not critical, but anytime you're calculating soil volume, don't assume the roots are going to go more than 3 feet deep. And you see that in all these drawings. The depth is 3 feet, and then you've got width and length, and combined that gives you volume. I would argue that in Albuquerque area, we are better off to use 2 feet as opposed to three, because most of us do not water long enough to push water deep enough for roots to go below about 2 feet. All right. So I mentioned these absorbing roots. These are tiny young roots, no bark. They're sponges. And they're picking up water simply because there's more water in the soil than there is in the root. It's all a matter of physics. The water is moving from high concentration in the soil to lower concentration in the tree to lower concentration in the air. So there's this constant flow. Plants just figured out how to get themselves in the middle of a process that was happening anyways. Woody roots, they're older, they're not absorbing, they do have bark, and they have a lot of that stability and anchoring function. Now, there's also a difference between the wood in a root and the wood in the trunk, the part above ground. So below ground, the wood does not have to deal with gravity. It is completely encased in soil, which is holding it up. Above ground, all of that mass is feeling gravity and wind, and so it needs a different kind of strength. Below ground, the strength that is needed is strength like a rope or a cable, strength that will resist being pulled. Above ground, some of that is needed as well, but also strength that will resist being crushed by its own weight. So resistance against compression above ground, resistance against tension below ground. So they have different chemistries. Below ground, you have lots of cellulose, which are long, stringy fibers, and not a whole lot of lignin, which are kind of blocky building block fibers. Above ground, a lot more lignin and still some cellulose. Um, so very different kinds of wood at the anatomical level. Now we're moving from the soil a little bit above ground here when we talk about these tissue types. Again, we've already covered this. Repetition is good. The upper image is above ground tissue. So we've got, the bark on the outside, the phloem or sapwood, or excuse me, inner bark, the cambium, which is making new phloem and new xylem. The xylem, also known as sapwood, is the youngest outermost layers of the true wood. And then the heartwood in the middle is physiologically dead, but hopefully intact. Trees grow in different ways. They grow at the level of the cell. So the cells divide. This happens in what we call meristem tissues, which is just a name for the tissues that are capable of dividing and creating both new cells that themselves can divide, so that can keep going over and over, and some kind of a working cell, a bark cell, a fruit cell, whatever kind of cell. And this meristem tissue is kind of found throughout the plant in various places. All right, so what is the function then of the part above ground, the shoots, or as we call it, the crown? We've got a trunk and we've got main branches that are there to support all of the smaller branches that hold leaves. It also provides that wood mass provides a storage location. If the tree has plenty of water and is making lots of sugar, making more than it's using, it can store it in its bank account as simple starches stored in wood. Then when that resource is needed, it can withdraw from that bank account and use that. The innermost part, the heartwood, again, it's physiologically dead. The tree does put metabolic wastes in there. So think about it in this way. Any living organism that is consuming food is producing waste. What does a tree do with the wastes that its inner living tissue produces? Well, it basically packs it into the oldest young tissue, and that oldest young tissue dies and becomes the newest, youngest old tissue. So it moves from being sapwood to being heartwood. And part of that is it becomes a repository for wastes. The smaller branches and limbs up in the tree are where the leaves are found, and also typically where flowering and fruiting occurs. Leaves are critical. They are the energy factories, but they're very expendable, and we'll get into that a little bit later. The leaves are also where a lot of hormones are produced that mostly influence root function. Roots produce hormones that mostly influence shoot function. And that's one way that the plant is communicating within its own body. And then we have flowers and fruit. So again, here's that cross section. We've seen that a few times. I don't think we need to dwell on it again. Another aspect to how trees grow is that they grow by adding new mass on top of what's already there. So they're getting thicker because they're adding new layers. They're also getting longer because they're adding new 1-year-old growth. But if I've got a branch that comes off the tree at 3 feet off the ground when the tree is 5 years old, at 15 years old, that branch, though now thicker and longer, still starts 3 feet off the ground. 30 years later, in the case of the picture here, that branch broke and somebody pruned it off and left a stub. That stub is centered 3 feet off the ground. So wherever a branch is originating, it's always going to be that high off the ground at its point of origination. The tip is going to grow, it's going to get thicker, but unlike humans, when my son was young, he was just basically a smaller version of me and just got bigger in all of his parts, and now he's a little taller than I am. Trees don't grow that way. They grow by adding an undetermined and yet to be defined number of new parts on top of what's already there. They grow opportunistically. Where's the resource? That's where I'm going to push growth. So sunlight and water are really the main issues. Low density soil is part of that. So each one of those little growing tips, those meristems, is kind of interpreting its environment independently and growing as best it can. The trees are also built with what we call a modular construction. So it's basically just a repetition of many similar, reasonably simple parts. Looking at that picture there, we see the tree does have one trunk, but then it's got multiple branches and multiple smaller branches coming off of those. And if it wasn't winter, there'd be a whole bunch of leaves up there. And any one leaf is completely expendable. Any one branch is completely expendable. The tree has others. It can grow new ones. It's just a matter of does it lose too much? Okay. So unlike an animal system, I have one heart. If I lose my heart, I'm done. The tree doesn't really have that kind of a singular thing, except maybe the base of the trunk, the root flare, that is kind of a singular area and where a lot of problems can develop. Right there at the bottom. But so there's this redundancy. Growth is also shaped by environment. So on the right, here's that tree we already saw. A little bit of a wider view there, one of the UNM arborists there working with it. We can see its root system got to grow in all directions radially like the spokes on a wheel, and that's great. On the left, we see a tree that spent way too long in a pot. Pots don't stop roots from growing, they just stop them from growing very far away from the trunk. So those roots keep growing around and over and under and around, and they stay within the pot. And you end up with a huge knotted mess. One of the problems with that knotted mess is it's very inefficient. Water that is in the soil 2 feet from the trunk may have to travel through 8 feet of root to get up into the tree. Also, because of the way trees grow, every year those roots get thicker and thicker and thicker. And at some point, they begin to actually get into conflict with each other and begin to crush each other and begin to reduce flow because they're too tight in that space. There's another example. The top of the tree is on the left, the root system is on the right. Uh, that tree had no chance when it went into the landscape. It was already way overgrown in the root system. Sometimes, quite often, that overgrown root system can be addressed at planting and fixed. It may set the tree back temporarily because you're reducing root mass, but you are eliminating future fatal flaws. Reaction wood is something fun about trees. So trees sense their environment. If they're in the wind and the wind is predominantly in one direction, they sense that. They sense gravity. They sense all these things. And they grow wood fibers where they sense a deficiency in strength. So they're always kind of reading their own movement, their own reactions to the environment, and adjusting. So if we see what we can define as reaction wood, it's telling us two things. One, that there's a load on that wood. Something is causing it to need to respond. And there is an attempt to address that issue. And so loads are inevitable. And if the tree is healthy, it's going to build new strength to support the issue. So we'll see some examples. One of the types of stress that wood feels, we've already talked about, is compression. That's the squeezing together of things, and largely due to gravity. Gravity is always pulling everything towards the ground. So anything above ground, and especially if it comes out horizontally or even at an angle, it's got even more load. So it has to grow fibers to support the load that it's sensing as it grows. So we get on the underside of this yew tree branch, we get a big chunk of compression wood that has grown in there like a bracket below a shelf to help give it strength. There's also the force called tension. And tension, wherever you have compression on the bottom side of a branch, you have tension on the top side. That part is being stretched and pulled. And so it'll grow more cellulose fibers up there to address that kind of a load. Compression wood, thick, dense, found on the underside. Tension wood, more like cabling. And it's typically found more often in broadleaf trees, where compression wood is more common in conifers. And I have not exhaustively researched that to find the exceptions, but there are. But again, trees are always kind of just addressing, monitoring, how am I holding together and where do I need more strength? So here's an interesting case. On the left, we see a stand of ponderosas in the front yard here in Albuquerque. The two on the farthest part of that picture with the yellow lines through them were removed because there was roof conflict concerns. And I got to go out there to look at the other trees right after the removal happened, and there's still big chunks of wood lying on the ground. So I took some pictures of those chunks of wood. And what I really like about the picture on the right is it shows the difference between the geographic center of that mass and the biological center of the mass. The biological center is in the blue ring off to the side there. If you were to count down through all the rings of the growth years, that's where you would end up. But it's very offset. The X representing the geographic center, that's on the side of the tree that is leaning. That's on the underside. So that's a whole bunch of compression wood supporting that lean. When people worry about a leaning tree, my response is usually if it grew with that lean, the worry is less. It grew the fiber to hold itself up. Now, if it fails, the lean may tell us exactly where it's going to go, but there's no reason just because it's leaning to assume it's imminently going to fail. If it has that good, strong compression wood on that side, it'll support itself. Also, that explains why the branch attachments, which you can see on the left and right side, kind of halfway through there, those dark ovals, those are also on the side, the compression side, because that was also the side where light was hitting the tree. The other side of the tree was shaded by the adjacent trees on that side. So trees are always optimizing their architecture based on their specific environment. Another type of stress that trees can feel we call shear plane. So I mentioned that there's compression on the bottom of a horizontal branch, like the one in the bottom picture. There's tension on the top, and where those two forces come together, it can slip, kind of like an earthquake. And it can split wood horizontally along that shear plane. We call them shear plane cracks. This is a pecan down at the Bakeki open space in the North Valley. And what is cool is we can see where the shear plane crack happened, and above and below it, it's kind of hard to tell in a 2D picture, but those are big rolls of new wood that are growing kind of massively adjacent to that crack. This is response growth put down to support a weakness that developed. On the right-hand side, we see the final type of stress that trees feel, which is torsion. So this is usually a wind-related thing. It kind of twists the tree, and it can cause that spiraling split in the stem. Also at the Bakeki is this marvelous, magnificent cottonwood tree. Go check it out. It's worth it. It's down in the southwest corner of the open space property. It's kind of all by itself, which means it has very little competition for all the available water and soil resources. It's growing healthy. It's a lovely tree. It does have a huge decay pocket at the very base. And adjacent to that decay pocket on either side are big tons of new wood laid down to support the tree around that opening. Again, the 2D picture doesn't give justice to the 3D feel of the real thing. On the far right-hand side, that picture is a close-up of what's going on the back side of the branch that we see on the right side of the tree there. There's also decay there. But again, you can see this big oval of new wood that the tree has laid down to support a weakening stem. So they're reading their environment and adjusting as best they can, and often quite well. This tree to me does not represent an imminent hazard in any way. How is the shape of a tree determined? Well, it's genetics and its environment. So trees will be programmed to generally be more upright, more sprawly, things like that. There's a genetic coding that determines a lot of that. But then the environment is really going to matter too, because if light's only available from one side, they're going to grow that way. If light's way more available because it's out in a park than in its natural setting, it's going to get broader than it would in the natural forest setting. And so that broader growth in the urban setting, because of the lack of competition, is both good and bad from the tree's perspective. It's good because the tree is maximizing light capture. Hey, I can put leaves over here and get light, and I can put leaves over here and get light. I can get a lot of light. I can grow really well. And so the tree is rocking and rolling. But a lot of that low horizontal growth may actually not be architecturally very strong, and it can end up breaking under its own weight. And then you have openings, big jagged openings through the protective bark, through the living rind, and all the way into heartwood. So again, forest on the left, Albuquerque landscape on the right. The right-hand tree, I believe, is a maple. In a natural forest setting, it would look much more like the trees on the left that are all growing towards the light, which is really concentrated up high. But in the yard setting, there's light coming in all directions, so the tree broadens out. Now, back to the genetics, there's kind of this differentiation between what we call excurrent trees, those that naturally grow a single upright stem, small side branches like that, really architecturally strong. Decurrent, we tend to lose that central leader pretty early. We get a lot of scaffolding branches, competing leaders. And architecturally, that often leads to more failures, just mechanically weaker. Examples of these, so trees that naturally grow with an excurrent form, that upright flagpole kind of form, bur oak on the left, they are beautiful at it. Sycamore often grows that way, but sometimes it grows decurrent, and either way, there's hardly a stronger tree. Ponderosa pine, very, very typical for it to grow that strong excurrent upward growth. Decurrent, we have a desert willow there in winter where we can see the branching. Cottonwood, purple leaf plum, all of those can be pruned to make them a little bit more excurrent and a little less decurrent, and that will improve structure and stability. But at some point, they're going to just want to get kind of squirrely on you. All right, let's talk a little bit about leaves. They are absolutely essential. They are the green energy factories of the plant. They are the sites of photosynthesis. And did you know that we see them as green because green light waves are useless to the leaf, and so it reflects them. It's using red and blue. And so we see the green because that's what it's kicking back. I mentioned that leaves are expendable. Any individual leaf is absolutely expendable, and even the whole crown full of leaves can be lost mid-season, and the tree can survive. If it's a healthy tree to begin with, it'll just tap into that stored bank account of simple starches in the wood, push a whole bunch of new growth, and say, I'm back in business. And that business is capturing sunlight, trapping it into energy bonds in the chemicals that are made. So what's powering all of this? If you look at the picture down at the bottom, there's a word stoma, and it's pointing at this little opening in the leaf. So the leaf has openings, typically on the bottom of the leaf, that allow for carbon dioxide to move into the leaf. Carbon dioxide is more abundant outside the leaf than it is inside the leaf, so it moves from high concentration to low, outside the leaf to inside the leaf. At the same time, though, water is more available or more concentrated in the leaf, so it's moving in the opposite direction, leaving the leaf. It's been calculated that more than 95% of the water taken in through the root system of an average plant is lost to the air in this way. But what that losing of water allows for, it allows the plant to keep those little doors open and let CO2 come in. If drought conditions hit, trees can close those stomata and they can stop water loss. They're also stopping carbon capture, and they're stopping the cooling effect that happens when that water evaporates out of the leaf, kind of like a swamp cooler, like I'm running right now. So the leaf tissue heats up. It could potentially heat up to a point where the chemistry denatures and it loses function. So that loss of water is what powers the growth of the tree. And I know we live in a desert. I know that the Water Utility Authority is very keen on reducing water use, and I very much support that. But they're also keenly aware of the value of trees in the landscape for many purposes. And I'm here to tell you that the cost of a tree in the landscape is water. That is the most important chemical to spend money on for tree health is water. Now, how it's applied is absolutely critical. A well-designed irrigation system is quite important, but we do have to spend water to have trees. So again, the leaves, the water's coming up from the branch through the leaf stem, the petiole, and into the leaf, and then out. It's just being lost. Sunlight is coming in and being captured, and CO2 is coming in and being captured, and simple sugars are being made. And from those simple sugars, all else is built. I've talked about how they're expendable. They're actually designed to be expendable. You can see in the picture, there's a little thing called the abscission zone. And like at the end of the season, or maybe if drought is, incrementally getting worse, the tree can decide to have that separation layer of cells die. And when those cells die, the leaf loses contact and falls off. So the tree can control that to a pretty good degree. All right, flowers and fruit. That's the sexual part of the tree. Trees are complicated in their sexuality. Some are strictly male and female, different plants, mulberry, cottonwood, juniper. Uh, but a lot of them are also both male and female. All of our fruit trees, most of our legume flowering trees, honey locust or Japanese pagoda tree, any of those flowers are both male and female. The flowers have to be pollinated. Wind is a very common pollinator, especially in an arid climate like this. And most of our large landscape trees are wind pollinated. And wind pollinated trees, unfortunately, are the ones that have allergen issues related to them. Insect pollinated plants tend to have visible, scented, colorful flowers, and they're not casting their pollen into the wind. They're attracting very targeted insect vectors to move it. So again, on the left, the elm with its naughty bits hanging out in public, and the catalpa with its much more demure and polite hiding of same. Fruit is ovarian tissue. Some time ago on the internet, I came across somebody's statement that the sweet bell peppers with 4 lobes, those are male fruit, and the sweet bell peppers with 3 lobes, those are female fruit. No, they're fruit. They're ovary tissue. They're female. End of discussion. So yes, this is how you get sexual recombination and new genes occurring and adaptation occurring. A lot of plants, however, can reproduce asexually, either root sprouting, typically root sprouting, things like that, thicket forming. We do have a slight difference between what we call gymnosperms and angiosperms, or conifers and broadleaf. The main difference is that the fruiting structure is not really a fruit, it's a cone, but frankly, it's functionally the same thing. And that's it. We made it out of here before the cane pulled me off to the side of the stage there. So I thank you all very much for your time and attention. I know we went fast through a lot of material. It is my understanding the Water Utility Authority has a PDF version of this talk. Hopefully that's something that is made available so you can go back and refresh yourself on a lot of this. But understanding just a little bit about how trees actually have to function really does help explain, well, okay, this is why we need to water not at the base, but out under the edge of the canopy. And this is why we need to water more deeply and, getting water down to 12, 14, 16 inches as opposed to daily watering just a tiny bit at the surface. Um, so I guess with that, Amos, I will zip it and turn it back to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Joran. I really appreciate that. I learned a lot today. There was at least 8 or 10 things that I picked up that I'm sure I've heard before, but just your way of explaining it made me sink in and allow me to understand it in a little bit better way and hopefully be able to explain to our customers that have further questions. So thank you so much for that presentation, as well as also reminding the participants that the Water Authority really does support trees. We do a number of things. We donate over $60,000 of large caliper trees every year to both the county and the city to help replace our aging Siberian elms. And we have a great rebate to support both the health of existing trees, so anything you can chalk up to keeping your trees happy, such as pruning, new mulch, irrigation improvements, as well as the planting of new trees. So go to our website at the505outside.com and learn how you can take advantage of that rebate. Also, Joran, as I mentioned, has contributed several other bits of content to the Water Authority's library. And as he mentioned, he talked about irrigation. He has a great webinar that we recorded last year about tree irrigation and some articles on our website. And that recording is on our website as well. So thank you everyone for joining today. We have all of the information we need to for those of you that qualify for the rebate. So we don't need anything else, and you should expect those within the next 90 days or so. And we did record this webinar. We will send you a link here later today or next week with that recording, and then we will post it on our website as well. So any questions that you might have related to anything that was discussed today or any of our other resources, please email us at the askanexpert@abcwa.org, and we will get back to you within a few days. So thank you everyone for joining. I appreciate it. Bye.